Hi there, welcome to the Easy Agile podcast. I'm Caitlin, your host for today's episode. At Easy Agile, we specialize in developing apps for Atlassian's Jira that help your team move from simply doing Agile to truly being Agile. Our apps have gained recognition and trust from over 160,000 users across top companies worldwide. With our products, teams can transform their flat Jira backlogs into something visually meaningful and easy to understand. Whether it's sprint planning, retrospectives, or PI planning, our apps are designed to foster seamless team alignment. Before we begin the episode, we would like to say an acknowledgement of country. This is part of our ongoing commitment towards reconciliation. Easy Agile would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which we broadcast today. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that same respect to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, and First Nations peoples joining us today. Let's jump into today's episode. Today, I'm joined by Leishan Gargano, a senior release train engineer at Scaled Agile. Leishan is a highly experienced professional when it comes to change management, system design, and stakeholder engagement, and has a passion for developing teams and connecting strategy to execution. Leishan, welcome to the Easy Agile podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, Leishan, you are a release train engineer. For our listeners, can you explain a little bit about the role? For anyone that's not familiar, how would you describe a release train engineer?
Yeah. I think one of the easiest ways for people to think of a release train engineer is kind of like a coach or scrum master for the art, right? For the Agile release train. A servant leader, right? Facilitating all of those art events, facilitating the processes and process improvements, and really measured in value delivery, right? And using flow metrics to measure those improvements and support of the arts.
So you mentioned flow metrics there. I've heard a lot about this recently and optimizing flow. What are some of those flow activities that an RT is responsible for?
I like to look at feature flow and cycle time. So really looking like, are we bringing all of our features in progress at once, or are we managing our WIP, not just at the team level, but at the art level? Are we taking the whole PI to get a feature through the system, or are we able to finish something before we start the next thing? So I look at that a lot. And also just, are we making and meeting commitments? Those PI objectives that we set, are we in that 80 to 100% range? A lot of people want like full credit, extra credit, right? And to be in the 120, but for us, like predictability really means you tried really hard and you stretched, but you also still like kind of made and met commitments. So I look at that really closely too.
I love that. You mentioned just then like quite a lot of different responsibilities that an RTE has. Do you think that there is one in particular that you really need to get right from the start?
Oh, as an RTE, I think the biggest thing is building the relationships and intention. As a servant leader, we really are there to help make the art better, to make being on the art enjoyable and productive and flow. So building that trust and those relationships as a servant leader is the first thing. If you get that wrong, no one will help you do the rest.
Yeah.
And you need a lot of help. You're not doing anything alone as an RTE.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I can definitely imagine that. Let's go a little bit deeper on that servant leadership that you just mentioned. Can you share your approach and what servant leadership means to you?
Servant leadership to me is helping people understand the direction, communicating like early and often so that they know where you're going. And then not just saying, how can I help you get there? What can I do? But saying, how can we go together? Right. A lot of coaching and understanding the problem to solve and connecting it to how it benefits the people. Just like we ask them to connect their work to how it benefits the customer. As the RTE, they're my customer. How does what I'm asking you to change benefit you? Not changing is always easier than changing, even if we don't like our current state. So why is it worth it?
I love that. Yeah, always asking the why and being really clear on it. Yeah, I think that's great. I done some LinkedIn digging of your profile, as you do, had a little bit of a stalk, and noticed that you hosted a webinar recently on tips and tricks and lessons learned as an RTE. Can we start with maybe some tips and tricks? What can you share?
The first thing I will say is lean on the Scrum Master team. And if you're lucky enough to have an Agile coach or another RTE, lean on that team. Your Lean Agile Center of Excellence, right? Those people have the expertise. They're also building the relationships. They're there to help you. Don't try to just prove yourself or go it alone. It's not possible, right? That team is your team for success. So 100% go to them. They're a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of relationships, and the best support.
Yeah, I know it's so important to have that support network around you. You just mentioned the Agile Center of Excellence. Maybe for some of our listeners aren't familiar, could you explain what that is?
Yeah, so the Lean Agile Center of Excellence can look a few different ways depending on your organization. At our organization, it is the coach, release managers, RTEs, and Scrum Masters or team coaches. And some larger organizations than ours, right, might have kind of that hub and spoke model of a centralized change leader, right? And then RTEs and Scrum Masters that are in different arts and around the org. And some even have separate laces, right, in different parts of the organization if it's really big. But really, they are that community of practice that holds your lean agile practices and the standards of those practices and talks to each other and debates and evolves them, right, to make sure that it's consistent throughout the org, that the org is getting consistent coaching, consistent guidance, right, and they're not being told 5 different things about how to transform, because again, change, right, and being lean is so hard. If you add too many voices into that coaching, it gets really overwhelming for folks.
Yes, 100%. And an agile transformation is already overwhelming as it is. So you can imagine that layered on top. I suppose, speaking, if we explore a little bit around those on like an agile transformation journey, at what point would you say it's important that that Lean Agile Center of Excellence is formed?
Oh, I think it should be in place pretty quick. Right. I mean, we talk about, training your leaders, right? Training your experts, and then doing safer teams and launching trains. You need that center of excellence there from the start, so that they can go out to the rest of the org, that they can do all that training and they can be there to support people through title changes, role changes. Launching an ARC can feel very scary to folks. If you don't have that in place beforehand, you're going to have a lot to reel in after the fact.
Yeah, I really like that. It's almost having this really solid foundation and unified voice to sort of go forward and support the rest of the org. So yeah.
And it's so great to have, consultant support, right? To have partners come in and help you and to have the right tools. But they need the help of people inside. They need that Lean Agile Center of Excellence of employees inside the company to help you be successful, right? They just like as an RTE, you need your team. Anybody, any tool, any people trying to do a change, a transformation are going to need that center of excellence, because all those parts, that's what makes the whole.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned as an RTE, a big tip or trick is to rely on that Lean Agile Center of Excellence. What do you think has been your biggest lesson learnt as an RTE?
There are a few things that have been particularly difficult for me. One of them is that I don't like to say no, and not in that I don't, that I take on too much or whatever, but more in that if someone has passion for something, I want them to be able to take it on. I want them to be able to move forward with it. And there are times where we really have to say, it's too much change. It's too much for this group to manage. In particular, the Scrum Masters and RTEs, people come to us for a lot of things, and they need that consistency from us, right? And they need predictability in a change to feel like we know where they're going. And if we introduce too many things, or if we try to hold too many things at once, it's easy for us to forget about it later or drop something else. So learning when and how to say no, again, not necessarily in that capacity way, but just in that the width of change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that what you just said there, learning how and when to say no. And I think that's not even exclusive to the RTE role as well. I think that's an amazing piece of advice for anyone listening, and to share amongst across our audiences, because I know it's definitely something I struggle with as well. So that's my takeaway from this, is to, okay, I'm going to constantly imagine, I'm like, no, Leishan told me to when and how to say no, like, and just focus on that. So yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice. What was your journey like to an RTE? I know we caught up last week and I got a little sneak preview into this, and I know it wasn't straightforward. So if you can share a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, I actually started in conflict resolution. I worked in sort of public-private reconciliation, doing a lot of natural resources facilitation. So hundreds of people, governments, companies, private landowners, residents, right? Trying to bring all those people together to get to consensus, or at least to build relationships that allow them to move forward. So really strong foundation in facilitation in particular, and conflict, and just day-to-day conflict. When we say conflict, we get so worried, oh, I don't do conflict. Well, conflict's everything all the time, right? It's all the disagreements we need to succeed in life. So that gave me a great foundation when I became a Scrum Master. And I did that for a few years, working with development teams. One of my favorite teams was our infrastructure team, 10-foot pole, because no one wanted to touch their work with a 10-foot pole. And I learned so much there, and eventually became a coach and started doing more strategic planning and coaching parts of the organization that weren't used to being on arts, marketing and other groups, which helped me transition to Scaled Agile, where I started working with our CMO, and as he grew the marketing team, helping coach that marketing group into an agile way of working, a safe way of working, before actually becoming a product owner, because I loved organizing around value, and I loved those different topics that we were working on internally. And one of the people I work with at Scaled Agile said, well, help us develop the product then for everybody else. So I did that for a little while, which gave me so much power in that, like learning how to say no and prioritize, and, coaching people to decisions is one thing, but as the product owner, I had to practice being where the buck stopped, right? There are 5 right decisions, just make one so that people are unblocked. And that prepared me really well for transitioning into RTE.
Yeah, you have such a wealth of experience there across so many different roles, and you can really see that each of those like key roles have taught you something valuable that you can take into this RTE role. So I think that's amazing. It's so cool to see that, even though it's not this straightforward linear journey, there's all these paths, that there's traits within each that ladder up to helping you succeed as an RTE. So I think that's really cool.
And I know people are afraid to make some of those lateral moves sometimes, but the skills that you can build might just be that thing, right? That gets you other open doors that you didn't even think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely love that. Yeah, just embrace every opportunity for what it may be, what it may not be. You don't know until you give it a shot. So I think I love that. I think that's really great advice. So everything we've spoken about in regards to being a release train engineer may have really hit the spot for some of our listeners. How does someone get there? Like, with their certifications, courses? Yeah, what's the process that way?
So another thing I probably did backwards, right? I started with a Scrum Master cert, and then actually ended up getting a SPC certification through Scaled Agile when I was a coach, because I was a coach before I was an RTE. And I learned about so many other parts of the business that way. But then to become an actual RTE, taking the SAFe RTE course, but then actually, like, there's a community of RTEs, which we didn't really talk about this, but being an RTE is a lonely thing. I said earlier, if you're lucky to have another RTE, it is a lonely role. You're really kind of on your own. So, not just getting that cert, but being part of that community and being able to, send people messages and ask them crazy questions was part of my, certification process, but also just community building to where I could feel like I had the connections and competence.
Yeah.
So yeah, I found all of them similar to holding each of the roles, right? Also getting that certification, just another tool in the tool belt.
Yeah, for sure. I want to touch on something you said there about an RTE being sometimes quite a lonely role. What do you think makes it lonely?
It's a role that a lot of people have strong opinions about what they need and what success looks like based on where they are in the organization. And there are usually few of you. And even if you're in a large organization with many, you're with your art, you're very focused on your section. And so having all of those pulls and expectations and not having anyone who understands what that feels like just makes it kind of lonely.
Yeah.
Now that we have 2 RTEs and a coach at Scaled Agile, it makes a big difference for me because they are right there in it with me, and it's very helpful.
Yeah, you can see in that scenario why that community of RTEs is, yeah, like you said, so important to lean on them as well. And yeah.
I find even just connecting to RTs outside our organization too. I grabbed beers with one a couple weeks ago, like those little things, even if you can find that person, meet them at a summit, meet them out in the wild, find them on LinkedIn and just say, hey, we live in the same area, we have the same role. It can go a long way because it may seem weird to reach out like that, but they probably are looking for that connection too.
Thank you so much for sharing. And for any of our listeners, I might pop some links to any certifications and some Scaled Agile courses. I'll pop that in our episode notes, so feel free to check those out. You mentioned about connecting with other RTs and meeting at summits, which is a really nice segue into the next part of our conversation. We just around the corner is the 2023 SAFE Summit, and we're heading to Nashville, Music City. What can we expect from SAFE Summit? What are you looking forward to?
Well, what I'm most looking forward to is that I'm putting together an RTE breakfast. So all RTEs are welcome, or even if you're a solution train engineer or you do the role of an RTE with a different title, I'm really excited to meet with those folks over breakfast and just chat it out. And my goal with that really is to have people to connect with so that as we go through the rest of the summit, listening to the talks, that we have people in role that we can check back in with over like drinks and stuff on the later days and say, oh, what do you think? How might that work? So that's what I'm most looking forward to.
Amazing.
But obviously there are going to be some great talks, and the product labs are always really fun because we get to play with the product together,
Yeah, cool. Tell me a little bit about the product labs. What's involved in that?
The product team puts it together, and they have like computers set up, and you can bring your own, and they talk through some of the new releases or things they're working on, and help you log into it and use it like in your context, but also try to get some feedback on how it works or how you might use it in your organization. So it's a nice two-way street. It's sort of, I need this, how might I do it? And then them saying, well, why don't you try and let me see how it works and how we should change it based on how you interact with it. So it's just really fun. It feels really like practical because it's so hands-on.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. I'm definitely going to have to try and come along and suss that out. It sounds really great. Where do you hope, or where do you think we'll see a lot of conversations focus at this year's SAFE Summit?
At SAFE Summit, I think the conversations will be really focused on just the day-to-day of SAFE. We have new topics that come up. We obviously have, new ideas that are going to be presented, but every time I go to one of these, it really is the connecting one-on-one to say, here's where I'm stuck, here's what I'm trying to learn. So we'll hear a lot about flow. We'll hear about team topologies, right? But we'll also hear those, I'm just getting started and we're stuck, right? We have change fatigue. We don't know if our arts are set up correctly. A lot of those classic conversations that are just really impactful and why people come together.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love that. Creating these spaces for people to bond over shared experiences and problems they're facing or wins they're seeing and sharing them. I think that's where these events are amazing for creating that kind of environment. Leishan, this is my very first Safe Summit. I haven't been to one before and I'm really excited. What advice would you have for first-time attendees, returning attendees? What's the way to get the most out of Safe Summit?
If you're attending with other people from your organization, the best thing is to split up. And so you can cover more ground and then come back together and share. My second advice is find people with a similar role as you, because again, you can do that same thing with those folks, and like split up and then meet up again and try to talk about it in your context. It's great to do that at like the parties too, because we throw great parties. But yeah, that's the best, because no matter what room you end up in, what talk you end up at, you're going to get a great nugget. But where it really sinks in for me is talking with someone else about what I heard and then thinking about, okay, what does that mean when I go home?
Amazing. Great advice, Leishan. If anyone listening happens to also be attending Safe Summit and they see Leishan on the floor or myself, make sure you say hello. And if you've got any questions for Leishan about the podcast episode, I'm sure she'll be more than happy to answer them and engage in a great conversation. And anyone looking to get advice around the RTE role, make sure you find her and have a chat. Leishan, I'm really excited to meet in person. We've done this podcast with yourself in the States, myself in Australia. So I'm excited to connect over in your world. And yeah, really, thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I know I sure did.
I did. Thank you.
Thanks, Leishan.